National Labor Relations Board. Meantime, the Illinois House has passed a measure to require full-day kindergarten in all schools in the state by 2027. Opponents say they're worried about unfunded mandates. Democratic State Representative Cyril Nichols says kids and their futures needs to be the priority. A measure passed by the Illinois Senate would create a commission to find a new Illinois state flag. The group would accept submissions from the public to recommend to the General Assembly. Democratic Senator Doris Turner is the bill's sponsor and says the proposal will help get people interested in state government. Bulls are playing in Portland tonight at 9 o'clock. The Blackhawks, the Wolves, the Red Stars, the Fire, all off today. This is WBEZ News.
Support for NPR comes from NPR stations. Other contributors include the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, a private corporation funded by the American people, and Jarl and Pamela Mohn, thanking the people who make public radio great every day, and also those who listen.
This is Reset. I'm Sasha-Ann Simons. We have made it to the end of the week. Wow. Time to take a step back, though, from the headlines and dig a little bit deeper on the weekly news recap. There are a lot of big stories to discuss.
Political hiring continues to be a focus in the bribery trial of 4 former ComEd executives and lobbyists.
With ComEd's former general counsel Tom O'Neill on the stand, government prosecutors today drew a direct line between ComEd's big legislation pushes and a law firm contract ComEd first entered with Reyes Kersen in 2011.
Thomas O'Neill was ComEd's top attorney. He told jurors that some people, including ComEd's own lobbyist, defendant Michael McLean, would frequently ask him to find work for people tied to former House Speaker Michael Madigan.
Here to break down those stories and more, we have the Chicago Tribune's Cook County and Chicago government reporter, A.D. Quig. Welcome back, A.D.
Thank you for having me.
And Paris Schutz, WTTW correspondent and co-anchor of Chicago Tonight. Good to see you again, Paris.
Long time no see. Good to be back.
It's been 3 days. And joining us is Jon Seidel, federal court reporter for the Chicago Sun-Times. Hey, John.
Good to see you.
So political hiring continued to be the focus in the ComEd trial this week, and there was more dramatic testimony. You've been attending the trial, John, so how about we start with Madigan's longtime political point man, Will Cousino, who took the stand?
Right, Will Cousino. He came in. I don't think too many people were expecting him to get on the witness stand yesterday, but he came in. Interestingly enough, turns out he had, like some other witnesses, had non-target letters. He had actually acquired through his lawyers an immunity letter, which made his testimony all that more intriguing. He was also, I understand from my colleagues in Springfield, tended to be just as reclusive as the former speaker. A lot of them had not really heard much from him about it, but he was a very significant presence down in Springfield.
Yeah.
And he did some helpful things for the prosecution. One thing that he did was he continued to put defendant Michael McLean, who's a longtime emissary of Michael Madigan's, right in the middle of decision-making down in Springfield. One of the first recordings that was played was from a December 2018 conversation when Madigan was talking about with some of his close confidants and staff members about leadership in the upcoming General Assembly. Michael McLean, who was not a member of the Speaker's staff, was right there in the middle of the conversation, and in fact was the one person who spoke up and offered advice to Madigan about what to do and how to strategize in the General Assembly. We also heard that in the lead up to passage of one of the key bills at issue in this case, the Future Energy Jobs Act in 2016, Michael McLean was being given inside information from Cousino about lawmakers who were expected to not be present in Springfield when it came time to vote on that bill. Mm-hmm. And we also learned that Madigan himself sent Cousino out to get that bill passed after Cousino realized it didn't have the votes to pass in 2016. He went out there at Madigan's direction to get it done.
Lots learned in that testimony, for sure. I want to turn now to ComEd's former general counsel, though, Thomas O'Neill. He testified for 11 hours over 2 days.
Sounds right.
What were the main takeaways there?
Tom O'Neill talked about a lot of things. He spent a lot of time talking about these two bills. There was FISA and also the Energy Infrastructure Modernization Act. These two very technical sounding bills are the ones that, frankly, we've heard through Thomas O'Neill and others, took ComEd from the brink of bankruptcy in the early 2000s to record profits in 2022. And he and others have actually insisted that this was actually very good policy for Illinois because it took an aging ComEd with its grid and its power system was starting to fail.
Yeah.
Helped the utility invest and do things now and prevent mass power outages that they couldn't before. So he talked at length about the passage of those bills and the massive lobbying effort that was actually involved in getting those bills passed. But then we also heard about a contract for a politically connected law firm, the law firm of Reyes Curson, where Victor Reyes, who's a political operative in the city, he's a partner. And, that Victor Reyes and his law firm first came on Tom O'Neill's radar around June of 2011. And Tom O'Neill said he was planning to hire the law firm, but he was in the midst of trying to get this EMA bill passed in 2011.
Okay.
He had other priorities, other things on his plate. He was going to get to it. In comes Michael McLean and co-defendant John Hooker, who was a lobbyist for ComEd, who suddenly got on Tom O'Neill's case and said, you got to get this done.
So defense lawyers were poking holes in that testimony.
Well, defense lawyers were circled back and pointed out that I think their point is that this law firm contract is one contract in the midst of a massive effort to get these bills. There were lots of lobbyists dispatched to try and get these bills passed. So I think their point is that one contract is not a bribery scheme made. And I would point out real quick that Tom O'Neill did make the decision to go ahead and hire Reyes Curson in 2011. It was again in 2016 that there was renewed pressure. There was an unusual part of this contract which guaranteed Reyes Curson 850 billable hours a year. He and his staff, Tom O'Neill and his staff, did not feel like they had the work to meet that guarantee.
A lot of hours.
So later on, they tried to reduce the number of hours in that contract. And again, there was pushback not only from McLean, but from Anne Pramaggiore. McLean went over O'Neill's head to Anne Pramaggiore sent this email in which he said this was going to provoke a reaction from our friend, which was his code for Mike Madigan.
Oh my
Said,
gosh.
is this a drill we must go through?
The code words in this whole
Right?
thing.
The recordings are unbelievable. There's such an insight
I was
into
going to ask
how
you,
this
Paris,
all works.
because given that the former speaker was not known for making himself available to the press,
No.
right? Do you think that these recordings they kind of give us this rare glimpse into how he operated?
Absolutely. I mean, it's the best glimpse I think we've ever had into how we operate. And I love how these lobbyists that used to work, for Illinois Democrats, for Madigan, Cousineau, and McLean, they keep saying, we know who our real client is. They're ostensibly lobbying on behalf of ComEd or independent interests. We know who our real client is. That's Mike Madigan. And the other thing that came out this week was on just one of those bills, I think it was the Future Energy Jobs Act, ComEd made $2 billion as a result, or $1.8 billion as a result of that bill. So consider what they paid in a fine to plead guilty to this alleged bribery scheme, $200 million. It's like a 10% down payment on making all these profits. Sounds like a pretty good deal for ComEd. I mean, the other thing I think about, though, like, John, everything you described here is it's like so weedy and so complex. And this is going to go on for like 2 more months. And I just wonder how jurors are going to digest all this. And it just harkens back to the initial Rod Blagojevich federal trial where, it just takes one juror to be hung. And then the feds realized they had to streamline the case hugely to make it really, really simple. I don't know if that's going to be the case here, but it seems like it's like so complex.
I also wonder how John is doing. I'm like, how is your head not spinning?
We're hanging in there,
sitting in that courtroom every day.
There's a lot to sort through, but I appreciate that. But no, Paris is right. I mean, what matters is what jurors are thinking. And look, there have been times when the testimony seems to have dragged on. But, I will say there was one particular moment like that this week where I think we were all kind of suffering. I looked over at the jury and they seemed like they were taking it in. And there's one in particular who, deep into this, was taking close notes.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Looking like
so
a
that's
reporter
a good sign.
over there.
Okay. Former journalist. Yeah.
So they're still with us for now, I think. Yeah.
AD, the whole trial, it's just quite the lesson in machine politics, is it not?
It is. And like John has said before, this is going to be a distinction between, is this normal politics? Is this day-to-day, as the defense has claimed? Or is this direct quid pro quo? And it's going to be up to the prosecutors to explain how this led to that. And the path was through Madigan, and this money was for this. Whether they managed to do that, I don't know. I like just reading it, knowing what I do know, which is a limited amount, about like ComEd and Madigan. I never covered Springfield, but trying to keep up with this day to day in the paper is like a complete head spinner. So I
You need
don't,
a whiteboard.
I need
You
a
need a whiteboard and all the
whiteboard. You
lines.
need all the red
Or
strings.
just do like me, get you a Jon Seidel.
Yeah.
This is Reset. I'm Sasha-Ann Simons. You're tuned in to our weekly news recap where we bring context and analysis to the biggest local and state stories of the week. Our panel today includes WTTW Channel 11's Paris Schutz, AD Quig from the Chicago Tribune, and Jon Seidel from the Chicago Sun-Times. So as the ComEd trial was going on at the federal courthouse just a few blocks away at City Council, they were also discussing the utility company. Fill us in, Paris.
Well, this is a franchise agreement, so it gives ComEd. It's been up for a couple years, and this is the agreement that gives ComEd the exclusive right to provide power to all of Chicago, basically. And this was basically Mayor Lightfoot's last big defeat here, or maybe one of her biggest defeats of her term. She sort of negotiated this agreement with ComEd, a new franchise agreement, and older people were like, "Wait a second, what incentive do we have to quickly pass this? Mm-hmm. She's a lame duck. Let's toss aside, given all the scrutiny on ComEd and all the anger at ComEd, maybe this is not the best deal the city could get. And really, I mean, in this deal, I didn't see a whole lot in the way of like rate relief or rate reduction or anything like that. I saw money for like climate change programs. So all the people were like, well, ComEd, again, I'll go back to what we learned in this trial. They made $1.8 billion because of the bill that passed in Springfield. They're drowning in money ostensibly. We can't negotiate something that like gives relief, especially to low-income ratepayers.
Well, and there was a big debate about whether the city should municipalize their electric. So basically, for the city to take over the grid here, and that got basically cast aside by Lightfoot's administration, who said it was unworkable. But I wonder if that will be more on the table, especially if we have a lot more progressive aldermen coming in this next term.
That's a great point.
So, Paris, you think this ComEd trial is impacting the council's willingness to approve this exclusive contract extension?
I don't know if the trial is. I do think that Mayor Lightfoot's lame duck status is. I mean, she can't whip up votes for this because why would they go along with that? And as AD said, I think yes, if these elections, these runoffs are going to be so interesting, if it's more of a democratic socialist wave, then this whole talk of municipalizing, making it public, socializing, so to speak, the power grid. But no, ComEd owns all the infrastructure, so that's why it would be incredibly hard to do that.
Yes.
AD, do you think that Lightfoot's inability to get this deal passed, is that a sign that her enemies at City Council, they're just feeling more empowered now?
I don't think it's necessarily retribution against the mayor, but I think it's protectionist for their own interests in the next term, and in some cases protecting who they think is going to win for mayor and giving them as many kind of deliverables and interesting things on the table that they could really take in their own direction as possible.
Because that next term is right around the corner.
Have anything? And I haven't. I mean, there's been 8 trillion debates. I haven't followed all of them. But have any of the candidates said what they want to do with the franchise agreement?
Not that I can recall off the top.
I will
of my
certainly
head.
ask when we talk to them
Yes,
next
please.
Thursday.
Yes,
there you go.
It's one of
Right
one
here
of
on
our
WBEZ at
That's how
6
you do it.
p.m. So more news out of City Hall this week. Activists and lawyers, they held a press conference asking the city to stop fighting wrongful convictions tainted by police misconduct. Can you fill us in on that, John?
Yeah, a little bit. I think the focus of this press conference was a Chicago police detective named Reynaldo Guevara, who was I think a very successful and well-known detective back in the 80s and 90s, who I think was kind of known as a bit of a closer when it came to various criminal high-profile cases. But he's kind of become the centerpiece of one of Chicago's many police scandals, and really kind of ranks very high up there with all of them. I mean, he has been accused of closing all these cases because he was torturing and coercing young men into confessions and sending them to prison for crimes that they didn't commit and taking away decades of their lives. And, I know that I've multiple times, and I think other reporters have, gone to a courtroom to watch Reynaldo Guevara take the Fifth Amendment. Wow. And he's been doing this for years. He's never been charged with a crime, but he is repeatedly, citing his right against self-incrimination.
And 11 new lawsuits were filed by men who say that they were framed by him and spent decades in jail. Right.
So this has been going on for quite a long time, and it's not going away. I mean, there are new claims, ongoing claims, and I think the point of this press conference was, again, with the thought that there's going to be a new administration coming in, stop fighting these lawsuits and racking up unnecessary legal bills and compensate the people who were wronged by Reynaldo Guevara. I mean, I think there are definitely policy questions within that. I mean, the judicial process, part of The litigation is to explore these claims by these individuals. I mean, you'd have to find a way to do it so that you're making sure the money gets to the right people. But look, I mean, the city has paid, according to my colleagues reporting, $76 million so far in settlements as a result of Reynaldo Guevara, and close to 40 people have been exonerated in cases. Wow. I believe he is not even considered to be a credible witness on the stand any longer by courts and even an appellate court. So this is a ongoing issue that City Hall probably should deal with, because it's going to cost the city quite a bit of money one way or another.
Yeah, we're going to hit the pause button for just a moment here on our weekly news recap, but we will be back with this great panel and more analysis for you of the week's big stories. Stay tuned. But first, we'll check back in with Lisa Labis for the latest news headlines. Hey, Lisa.
Hey, Sasha. So the Pentagon today saying a drone strike has killed a U.S. contractor and wounded several other people. U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin says the American intelligence community had determined that drone was of Iranian origin. 5 American troops and another contractor in northeast Syria were injured. American forces said they retaliated soon after with precision airstrikes in Syria, targeting facilities used by groups affiliated with Iran's Revolutionary Guard. A lawyer for Donald Trump is back in court in Washington today after being ordered to answer questions before a grand jury investigating the possible mishandling of classified documents at the former president's estate in Florida. M. Evan Corcoran entered federal court in the District of Columbia early this morning. Ford says its new assembly plant being built in western Tennessee will be able to build up to 500,000 electric pickup trucks per year when the plant is at full production. Ford says it plans to start production in 2025 and says the assembly and battery plants will employ about 6,000 people with an investment of about $5.6 billion. You're listening to 91.5 WBEZ.
WBEZ is supported by Me's Meals. Me's Meals does all the chopping and prep work to cook from-scratch dinners in 30 minutes. Customers can try a kit at meezmeals.com/WBEZ.
On the next Science Friday, space isn't as silent as you might think. Could it sound something like this? How scientists are making data from the cosmos sing. Plus, we'll check in on March Mammal Madness, a showdown between some of the planet's most beloved and unloved critters. That's on Science Friday from WNYC Studios.
That's this afternoon at 1 o'clock on WBEZ Chicago.
WBEZ is supported by the Dover Foundation, the philanthropic arm of Dover, a global manufacturer headquartered in the Chicago area. Dover proudly supports science and technology programming on WBEZ. More information is at dovercorporation.com/community. Support is provided by Goodman Theater, presenting Lealina, a new play about how families fall apart and find each other again amid turbulent global and social change, on stage through April 2nd, goodmantheater.org. 42 degrees, a cloudy day around town, and that's as warm as it's going to get. This is 91.5 WBEZ.
I'm Sasha-Ann Simons, and we're back now with more Reset and more of our weekly news recap. All right, let's jump back into these stories.
Pro-life supporters from all across the state descended on the state capitol yesterday for Illinois March for Life.
Illinois U.S. Senators Dick Durbin and Tammy Duckworth have sent 2 recommendations to the White House for who should be the next top prosecutor.
Endorsements continue to roll in for both mayoral candidates.
Groups are praising progress on a measure to phase out styrofoam food containers.
Chicago residents can now head to early voting locations across all 50 wards, including the super site on North Clark, to cast their ballot.
Our panel here to walk you through those stories is A.D. Quig from the Chicago Tribune, WTTW Channel 11's Paris Schutz, and Jon Seidel from the Chicago Sun-Times. Okay, A.D., early voting kicked off Monday for the city's runoff election, and the 2 mayoral candidates, they met up on Wednesday night for their 3rd runoff debate. First, let's listen to some of those highlights.
Yeah, I'm not going to defund the police. I made that very clear. What I'm going to do is make sure that we implement a smart plan.
So this whole idea that somehow we're going to promote detectives and that's going to solve the problem, it's going to do absolutely nothing.
The governor of Illinois, J.B. Pritzker, did the right thing by shutting down everything because it was a matter of saving lives. Unlike Paul Vallis, who was supported by the Republican Party, who referred to the governor as a dictator. Because we were trying to save lives.
My criticism was really focused on the Chicago Teachers Union, who effectively kept schools shut down long after they should have.
Someone like Paul Vallis that wants to continue to give someone like me a lecture on what I know versus what he knows is ridiculous, but I'm familiar with that.
AD, did we learn anything new this week?
No. I don't think.
What were your highlights?
I mean, it's a narrowing of a lot of the things that we've heard repeatedly. So Brandon Johnson wants to make the case that Paul Vallas is a secret Republican, that he doesn't support working people, highlighting the endorsement of the FOP. Paul Vallas, meanwhile, has wanted to talk about the way that Brandon Johnson wants to raise taxes, how he believes the Chicago Teachers Union is responsible for lengthy remote learning, which led to learning loss and a loss of enrollment at CPS. It's kind of like we've been hearing this stuff pretty much nonstop, but it's like more narrowed, more tailored, and in some cases sharper. But Paris had something.
Well,
Paris
I was just going to say,
something.
we learned, although I guess this was comment that was out there before, but Vallas called Pritzker a dictator for the shutdown. And one of the many times that Vallas co-hosted on this very conservative radio network and radio show, kind of echoing like a lot of conservative talking points about COVID and shutdowns and crime. And you know, if you look at the polls narrowing, I just wonder if that attack from Brandon Johnson, kind of trying to paint him as Republican, bringing up all these comments, might be landing.
Yeah, he was basically on this show. He was co-hosting with Amy Jacobson. Basically said the mayor and the governor's use of executive orders rather than approving remote learning and other like COVID mitigations legislatively was dictatorial. And this is the first time we've kind of heard Governor Pritzker respond to these. HuffPost got a quote from him basically saying, like, I hope Paul Vallas listens to the experts and not conservative radio hosts when he has to make big decisions like this.
Mm-hmm.
The governor has not endorsed, but that's like the closest we've got to
Interesting.
the governor's thoughts on these candidates.
And then don't forget, Darren Bailey, the governor's opponent, puts out a video endorsement of Vallas saying that we need Vallas. What was the phrase he used? Like Brandon Johnson, it would be dark times for Chicago or something like that. Some kind of very strange phrase. And then they quickly took that. I'm sure the Vallas campaign was pulling their hair out, saying, get that video down, get that video down. And then they took it. Then
it
Darren
disappeared.
Bailey, it disappeared
right, because
somehow.
the whole campaign, Vallas has had to say, I'm a lifelong Democrat, I'm a lifelong Democrat, in part because he flirted with a potential Republican run for the Cook County Board, which he ultimately never did, but he basically said, I only thought about that because the Strogers had such a strong hold on Democratic politics that I never had a chance as a Republican. But these associations with and support from Republicans, far-right folks, Trump donors is obviously weighing on him and something Brandon Johnson wants to highlight.
I want to dig more into some of these mayoral endorsements, folks. Let's talk about the newest. Former Chicago Public School CEO and Secretary of Education, Arne Duncan. So who is he going with?
He's going with Paul Vallas, but did say if Brandon Johnson wins, I'll support him 100%. And it was not about education, this endorsement. It was about Paul Vallas's relationship with the FOP being a strength. So Arne Duncan has been working with Chicago CRED, which is a violence prevention organization, for several years. And his argument in a Tribune op-ed this morning was basically that Paul Vallas has a good relationship with the FOP that might get them on board with the kinds of reforms that the Chicago Police Department needs to gain trust in communities.
I should mention, because I mentioned Darren Bailey put out that Pat Quinn, former Democratic governor, did endorse Paul Vallas.
His running mate?
Vallas was his former running mate. They lost to Bruce Rauner. And, Vallas has put together a list of older people, Chicago, across, racial lines that have endorsed his campaign. So it's a rainbow endorsement here, but what stands out is all those endorsements from the far right, too.
But what also stands out to me is this continuation of the city's black leaders just being so split in their endorsements. Give us the latest on that.
So the big one this week was Bobby Rush endorsing Paul Vallas. And the Tribe did a really interesting article breaking down how basically what I call establishment Democrats have kind of stuck with Paul Vallas. So older black elected officials that kind of came to power in the Daley era seem to be backing Vallas, which critics or progressive activists say is a sign that Vallas would be a continuation of the status quo. He's like an old school Democrat, not progressive, won't take us in the direction that we need to go in. When these endorsers make their endorsements, they're not saying, I'm a Daley person, and that's why I'm sticking with Paul Vallas.
Right, they're not identifying. Yeah.
No. They're saying Paul has the experience. He's been doing this for decades. He knows the right people. He's collaborative. And most importantly, he's going to address public safety, which is what a lot of our constituents care about. They want to be safe, and Paul can deliver on that.
And we saw Jesse Jackson endorse Brandon Johnson.
That's right.
Right.
And we're going to see Bernie Sanders next week rolling through town. He had a lot more national endorsements this week. Ayanna Pressley, who was raised in Chicago, also endorsed him this week. The progressive ones for Brandon Johnson also continue. But yes, you're right. There's been a big divide between establishment Black Democrats and more progressives, and that's going to be kind of key to win over. The other question is Paul Vallis placed second in a lot of majority Latino wards in the first round, but Chuy Garcia has since endorsed Brandon Johnson. So will all those people jump on team?
Think of the amazingness of that comment that Bobby Rush is establishment, former Black Panther, is endorsing the guy endorsed by the FOP.
Are you surprised by that?
He's had such a weird mayoral endorsement history.
Yeah, I think he might have endorsed Bill Daley 4 years ago.
He endorsed Tony Preckwinkle. And in the second round, at least, I don't remember what he did in the first round, but
I thought it was Bill Daley in the first. I could be wrong on
at the time, he said, Lightfoot is the FOP candidate, and she's going to have the blood on her hands of the next black youth that is shot, and now he's endorsing the
FOP candidate. But it really goes to the fact that Chicago's racial demographics. It's not a monolith in each of these groups, and as AD said, I've talked to like police officers and politicians about this, older Black and Latino folks tend to be more pro law enforcement. Like the notion of defund the police being something that most Latino residents want or African American, that's completely wrong.
Yeah.
It's like younger members of these communities tend to be more progressive. Older members tend to like the law and order pitch.
And I think that's part of why Brandon Johnson has backed off of the defund so hard in the past couple weeks.
Yeah. John, how much weight do you think these endorsements carry?
Well, I keep getting emails every day about who's the latest to endorse. I think they matter, that we hear about them all the time.
Yeah.
So no, I think they carry a certain amount of weight and send a certain message. But I like you have been fascinated by the racial split that we've been talking about. AD and Paris have given us some great insights there. But no, I think they matter. That's why we hear about them.
We're also seeing, AD, that Vallis is raising a heck of a lot more money than Johnson.
Yes. This is the one thing I was watching out for after the first round, after Paul Vallis won, because he was pulling in quite a few business donations in the first round, and that has only amped up.
He's raised $11.1 million.
Yeah, we're not at Rahm Emanuel $24 million levels yet, but
But Johnson's at $7.1 million.
Right, and a lot of those are major labor organizations. Obviously, the CTU, the Illinois Federation of Teachers, the American Federation of Teachers, all throwing in big.
Well, consider the CTU giving another $1.5 million to Vallis, and they.
To Johnson.
I'm sorry. Oh God. Yeah, I'm sorry, Johnson. It's early. It's early. Giving another $1.5 million to Johnson, and their House of Delegates kind of voted on behalf of all their members to divert $8 a month in union dues for all their members over to the campaign. And there's a lot of CTU members scratching their heads. I think they probably support Brandon Johnson, but they're like, do we really want to be giving all our money over into political campaigns like this?
Especially when they have the elected school board elections coming up soon.
21 races then at some point that they're going to have to be a part of.
Right.
Yeah. All right, John, let's turn away from the mayoral race, shall we? All right, Senators Tammy Duckworth and Dick Durbin, they've submitted 2 names to replace the U.S. Attorney for Northern Illinois, John Lausch. So who are they, and how does this selection process, how does that work?
Sure. So the 2 names that have been sent to President Biden are April Perry and Sergio Acosta, both former federal prosecutors who have gone into private practice. April Perry, she did some work for the U.S. Attorney's Office and then moved on and actually worked for Kim Foxx's office and resigned amid the whole Jussie Smollett mess. I believe she was the ethics officer at the time and wrote a memo about Kim Foxx's recusal from the case. And stepped away, and I don't believe she commented on her reasons from stepping away. Sergio Acosta, another former federal prosecutor. We talked about police scandals. He was involved in the prosecution of John Burge back in the day, and is also in private practice now. The way it works is the president will take these 2 names and presumably choose one to nominate. The Senate confirms, and we have a new U.S. attorney. What's interesting, real quick, is that one thing that we heard about this search as soon as the former U.S. Attorney John Lausch left was just about bringing some diversity into the office. It's been dominated by white males, and now we see a woman and a Hispanic male nominated for these positions. So it appears as long as it's one of these two, it'll be a historic pick.
Remind us what exactly the local U.S. attorney is tasked with.
Sure. So the local U.S. attorney is the federal government's primary lawyer here in the Northern District of Illinois.
The top prosecutor for the feds locally.
Top prosecutor for the feds locally, but also
Right.
represents the feds in civil matters.
Okay.
I mean, it's not all just criminal. And so he is the lawyer here in town. He is the top federal prosecutor. He is the one not only behind the ComEd bribery case that we've been talking about. There are street gang prosecutions. There are fraud investigations. And again, civil matters that have to be dealt with here, too. They're entangled in a case with the Chicago Cubs over ADA access at Wrigley Field.
The range.
Right. So, no, it's actually quite a powerful position. I mean, we've seen the power of it under John Lausch because of the results of the public corruption prosecutions. So it's a very important office. And it's interesting to see how quickly nominations were sent to President Biden. I think it took much longer last time around, but that's probably a reflection that we have two Democratic senators sending names to a Democratic White House. There is part of the process requires some kind of agreement between the White House and the home state senators.
I see.
Last time it was between President Donald Trump and Durbin and Duckworth.
I see.
Now
So
I
that
think
takes
they're
more
all
time.
on the same page.
Yeah. This is Reset. I'm Sasha-Ann Simons. You're tuned into our weekly news recap where we bring context and analysis to the biggest local and state stories of the week. Our panel this week is WTTW Channel 11's Paris Schutz, AD Quig from the Chicago Tribune, and Jon Seidel from the Chicago Sun-Times. AD, back over to you. The streets outside the Illinois state capitol, they were filled with thousands of abortion opponents on Tuesday. What were they protesting exactly?
So this was the March for Life, which is typically held in Chicago, but was in Springfield because abortion opponents are hoping to meet with lawmakers, in part to lobby against legislation focused on pregnancy centers. So there's a couple bills, SB 1909 and HB 2463, that would regulate how pregnancy crisis centers can talk to clients. So supporters of these bills, including Planned Parenthood, describe these as fake clinics that give inaccurate and untrustworthy information, basically designed to shame or scare women away from receiving abortions or creating a delay between a woman seeking care and actually having that abortion. So they may say negative things about abortion, birth control, condoms, or sex, or asserting false risks about abortion. This is according to proponents of the bills that want to scale back exactly what these crisis pregnancy centers can tell clients.
Okay.
Supporters say these are important resources that these centers offer. They do pregnancy tests, ultrasound support programs for moms and dads. But this is just Illinois' role in this national divide post Roe v. Wade. So Illinois is considered an abortion haven at this point. The state legislature and the governor did a lot of stuff to basically increase access to abortions. They let state health insurance and Medicaid cover abortions, protecting healthcare professionals who provide abortions and out-of-state travelers who come here to seek the procedure, which we've seen thousands of since Roe changed.
Right.
But I think we are considered kind of a battleground for abortion opponents to kind of turn the tide back. When I first reported on the impact of Roe this summer, anti-abortion activists basically said, Illinois needs to straighten up. We have to reverse what has made us an abortion haven, including the parental notification law and what I spoke about earlier in terms of increased access.
Yeah. Let's stick with Springfield, but Paris, let's jump inside the Capitol for a second. Attempted book bans continue to surge. This is after setting a record last year. What are Illinois lawmakers doing in response to
Well, just like AD said, this is kind of, again, illustrating the divide in this country. So the red states, it seems like they can't move fast enough to pass bills that either target or appear to target the trans community and then, target books that they find that are unseemly or inappropriate, centering on sexuality or LGBTQ issues. So in Illinois, a blue state, deep blue state, the exact opposite. Lawmakers are trying to go after any local libraries that do ban books. And basically, it's been crafted by Secretary of State Alexi Giannoulias. Fun fact, the Secretary of State is the chief librarian of the state, which is
I was 2 weeks ago years old when I learned that there was a position.
Many interesting duties. So he's, is basically saying that they're going to withhold funding from libraries that go against the American Library Association standard of not bowing to political pressure to remove books. Now, if I could just talk about the politics for a second, Alexi Giannoulias is a guy who ran for U.S. Senate 12 years ago. This is a very ambitious politician. this is a really good issue for him. You know, this is a good notch in his belt to say, hey, I stopped book bans and I made sure that Illinois held the line on book bans. And it's also interesting to see the Republican opposition to this. They are opposed to it, but they're very careful to say this isn't about, we don't want to ban books. We're just concerned that some of these more sexually explicit books shouldn't be within, sight of little children, and we don't want to take away local control. That's our opposition. But again, supermajority Democrats, this is gonna fly through. There's no doubt about it.
In Paris, next time we go to our favorite fast food spot or we bring home leftovers, that could look a lot different, right?
Yeah, and so another bill. This is a big win for environmentalists. They're going to phase out the use of single-use plastics at all establishments starting in 2024. But then I kind of harken back to the plastic bag ban. Retailers found a very similar substance that wasn't plastic, but I don't think it was more environmentally friendly, and so they just went with that. Is there something like that here for utensils or containers, or if you go to like Whole Foods, like there's the plastic utensils, and then there's the dispensary that dispenses the more environmentally friendly, quote unquote,
compostable stuff.
Yeah. Is that really better for the environment? And again, environmentalists are saying like all this plastic winds up in the Great Lakes. It pollutes the Great Lakes, pollutes everything. So we're trying to get rid of it. But is there a workaround? There always seems to be.
Any idea when the Senate's going to look at this?
Yeah. I think it's going to go pretty quickly to the Senate, and this is another one that I would assume. I am not supposed to assume, but again, supermajority Democrats, Democratic governor. This is a good issue for them, so this would probably pass.
Paris, we had one piece of legislation that was just plain nuts. You want to tell our listeners what this is about?
Womp, womp.
You went for it.
Apparently,
I did.
The lawmakers passed a bill to designate the official state nut of Illinois, the black walnut.
Yay! Okay.
I don't know. I don't know.
Is it edible for humans? Do humans eat it?
Well, that's a loaded term right now in Illinois, whether it's edible or not. But
do we have any fans of the black walnut at the table?
We're taking
one of those walnuts. It's replacing the old state nut, which was Rod Blagojevich. I'm sorry.
Oh my gosh.
I can't do that anymore.
On that note, time to take a little break. We will be back with more stories, some nuts, some not so crazy. We'll see what gets thrown into the mix. Helping me make sense of it all, WTTW Channel 11's funny man, Paris Schutz, AD Quig of the Chicago Tribune, and Jon Seidel of the Chicago Sun-Times. But first, we'll check back in with Lisa Labas.
You guys are so silly. U.S. Senator Bernie Sanders will headline a pre-election rally for Chicago mayoral candidate Brandon Johnson Thursday at the UIC Forum. The Sun-Times reporting the rally will also feature rapper Vic Mensa and multiple congressional endorsers. Sanders endorsed Johnson last week. Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer today signing legislation to repeal that state's decade-old right-to-work law. It was passed by a Republican-controlled legislature. The 2012 law had allowed people in unionized workplaces to opt out of paying union dues and fees. And today's repeal is seen as a major victory for organized labor, with union membership in Michigan reaching an all-time low last year. Shares in Deutsche Bank, Germany's largest lender, have fallen sharply and dragged down major European banks. Deutsche Bank closed down today 8.5% on the German stock exchange after falling as much as 14%. The new turmoil in the global financial system comes after the collapse of two U.S. banks and a government-orchestrated takeover of Swiss lender Credit Suisse by rival UBS.
Paul Vallis and Brandon Johnson both want to be Chicago's next mayor. Tell WBEZ what questions you have for them, and we may ask the candidates at our forum later this month. Ask now at wbez.org/Chicago elections.
Some listeners give monthly, some give larger gifts. Most just give what they can. Each and every listener that chooses to support WBEZ is just as important as the last. This is listener-supported WBEZ.
WBEZ is supported by UI Health, announcing its new specialty care building and outpatient surgery center located in the heart of the Illinois Medical District. Learn more at uihealth.care. A healthier future starts at UI Health. Support is provided by Me's Meals. Me's Meals does all the chopping and prep work to cook from-scratch dinners in 30 minutes. Customers can try a kit at meezmeals.com/WBEZ. And WBEZ is supported by Illinois Holocaust Museum, presenting the Negro Motorist Green Book, an exhibition highlighting the historic guide for Black travelers in 20th century America. Open through April 23rd. More information is at ilholocaustmuseum.org. Weather forecast, it's been overcast today, 39 degrees right now at Midway. We're heading up to a high of about 43 under generally cloudy skies. Rain tonight and a mix of rain and snow on Saturday. WBEZ.
I'm Sasha-Ann Simons, and if you are just joining us, it's our weekly news recap. We've been getting updates on the mayor's race and the trial involving lobbyists for ComEd. But wait, there's more. Your three very smart and savvy guides to what happened this week are A.D. Quig from the Chicago Tribune, Jon Seidel from the Chicago Sun-Times, and Paris Schutz from WTTW's Chicago Tonight. So, folks, it has begun. And if you are a driver, you know exactly what I'm talking about. I'm talking about that 3-year construction project on the Kennedy. It's officially underway. I wonder if any of you have experienced slower drive times, maybe, this week?
Can it get any slower on the Kennedy? And is there ever not construction?
I don't drive. I just pass it
Good
on
for
the
you.
train sometimes, and I'm like, thank God that's not me.
Hi, drivers.
I mean, that's the whole reason I bypassed the Kennedy on my way in here today. You know, I mean,
Yeah.
it's just the coverage has been clear. Just stay away if
Stay
you
away
can.
from the Kennedy.
You know, for the next 3 years.
I've driven on it a couple times this week, and I'm with Paris. It's always slow.
It's like Sunday at like 2 in the afternoon, and it's like bumper to bumper. Like, where is everybody
Where is everyone going? Don't you all work?
Relax, folks. It's Sunday.
And for those who have the means to avoid the traffic on the Kennedy, a whole new way of getting to the airport could be on the horizon.
Yes. Emphasis on this is not a sure thing.
Okay.
But United and Archer are whenever something really fast to the airport happens, I just think of that press conference between Rahm Emanuel and Elon Musk about the
Right.
super shuttle underground. Never happened. Anyway, United and Archer are planning air taxis between O'Hare and the West Loop.
Air taxis, you say?
Which sounds like so egalitarian, but no, they're helicopters.
Oh,
basically.
okay.
They're helicopters.
So you can take a helicopter to O'Hare?
Presumably. You basically land around Pilsen in the Illinois Medical District. It would be a 10-minute ride to O'Hare. No idea where they would land at O'Hare if there's a spot for them. Obviously, the same trip can take an hour or more during rush hour. These are electrical aircraft. This is also perhaps getting a trial basis between the Manhattan Heliport and Newark Airport. It still needs federal approval to fly, but it sounds like it would cost somewhere between $140 and $160 one way.
Hence why we don't know whether this will happen.
Right. But you've got to imagine there are some big money clients who would much rather take an electric helicopter than sit on
10 minutes to
Sit on the
O'Hare.
highway.
That's pretty compelling. Yeah.
Especially since they can't fly into Meigs Field anymore. So
Right.
maybe this is the next best option. But I'm still probably going to be taking the blue line. And I would imagine they want to get this up and running in 3 years. It's going to take a long time for the FAA to approve something like this if they do. I mean, it's kind of massive. This kind of level of traffic, air traffic, within a city and from an airport to this is kind of a game change. And I got to imagine that they would have to do their due diligence to
make sure
approve
it's safe.
something like that.
Yeah.
And AD, I'm sorry, did you say anything about how much it would cost to take one of these rides?
In other cities, it's been projected at $140, $150 one way.
Oh, wow. I'll take the blue line.
Exactly.
$250.
I will
$250,
continue to
folks.
drive and park at Lot G. All right, let's steer the conversation off the Kennedy up to northwest suburban Lake in the Hills. So this is where the owner of Uprising Bakery and Cafe announced that she's going to be closing down after receiving threats over hosting drag show events. Now, we had Ed Yonka from the Illinois ACLU on this week to discuss this. Let's listen.
In response to the protest and the vandalism by a Proud Boy at that facility, local officials tried to change the zoning of the business in order to block events. There was a place where we were able to help and the business was able to move forward.
And Paris, you've interviewed the bakery owner, Karina Sack, on Chicago Tonight.
Yeah, I mean, I think she's basically saying now she can't survive as a business. Part of her revenue, I mean, part of her mission was to sort of be a safe space, she said, for LGBTQ, so she hosts drag shows, but also part of her revenue, too. She said we can't really survive alone on being a bakery, so we had these other events, and so that's why we're hurting right now.
Now, is it for sure that she's going to close down?
No,
or?
I think she's making an appeal. I mean, to like raise money and to have people come patronize her store. But remember, this store was vandalized last summer. Someone threw a brick through the wall. They had to close down, and they had to cancel this drag show they were going to have. And this kind of became a flashpoint from some of these far right groups who have, set their targets on the trans community on drag shows. And, word spread online in some of these chat rooms, and people went over there and they would like sit outside and like kind of intimidate people going in. It was just very strange. I think this group, Awake Illinois, they weren't part of the people intimidating, but they were part of the folks kind of spreading information saying, hey, this is a bad store. They're doing all this trans stuff. So, a lot of provocateurs around the country, you've seen this, they've kind of hit on this community and seized on it, and they spread misinformation. And I think it's kind of their opportunist in the sense that it raises their own profiles, but unfortunately has real life consequences here. Yeah. I mean, it's hurt people. It's made people really scared. And then in the case of this business, she's basically saying, we can't really even stay open anymore.
We've got another LGBTQ related story, Paris. The Blackhawks announced that they will not be wearing Pride jerseys during their warm-ups this Sunday.
Yeah, this is a promotion
on Pride Night,
right? And lots of sports franchises do promotions like this, but the reason given is because of all the Russian players in the league and on the Blackhawks. And they don't want to put the Russian players in danger because there are anti-gay laws in Russia to where like if you're a Russian citizen, you're going to get in a lot of trouble if you even are seen publicly supporting the LGBTQ community. So the Blackhawks say, out of abundance of caution, we're not going to put them in that position. We'll do other kind of things to celebrate Pride instead.
Now, sometimes the news that we cover here on the Weekly News Recap, it actually involves the media. We've got one of those this week, John. It involves the city's chief labor negotiator and the Sun-Times City Hall reporter. Fill us in on that.
Right. Yeah. So Jim Franzek, the labor negotiator, he joined my colleague Fran Spielman on her regular podcast recently. I think it was last week. And boy, it sounded like from listening to the podcast that Fran had been trying to get him on her show for quite a long time. Mm-hmm. And he told her that, he always had hoped to stay in the background and just kind of do his job, but he finally relented and joined her on the show. Turned out that was apparently the end of his very long career at City Hall, at least for now, because shortly after he participated in this podcast in which he gave what sounded to me like a full-throated endorsement of Paul Vallis. Apparently, Mayor Lightfoot decided while on vacation to fire Mr. Franzak as a result of
ouch
what he said on the podcast. So I don't think we've really heard a full explanation for the reason for the firing. I mean, obviously, he did speak very highly of Paul Vallis.
And he and his wife have
donated.
Both donated to the house as well.
Mm-hmm. That's right. There have been contributions. Right.
Does this sound, AD, in Paris, like something Mayor Lightfoot would do?
From what I heard, that the mayor was really upset because it is a member of her administration. I mean, Franzek has been there, for context here, for like 40 years or something like. So she was upset that he would go out there and give this, as John said, like kind of full-throated endorsement of Paul Vallis, and giving the perception that perhaps like that extends to her. She doesn't want to be seen weighing in on this at all. So she was really upset at that. And it is amazing because Franzek, you think of all these crazy union disputes and labor disputes over the years and contract negotiations and the Chicago Teachers Union going out on strike and FOP. Franzek has been the guy for the city negotiating those contracts year after year after year. And he's a very mild-mannered, kind of pleasant guy. You'd think he'd have some bruises from all these great contract battles. But, he never made it personal when he was negotiating those. He was always a very kind of congenial guy. Mm-hmm. And I think even the teachers union and the FOP, as angry as they would get, they wouldn't direct their anger at him, because he was just there trying to get a deal done. And he's the guy, that knows all these labor contracts for the city. I would assume that, there I go assuming again, but I would think that Paul Vallis, should he win, Franzek would be a guy that you'd probably want to bring back.
And that's why I was saying his career might be over for now. I wouldn't be surprised, if Vallis wins, he comes back.
Well, I guess it's a reminder to us all, just be careful what you say in interviews.
There's an hour of all of us talking now.
There's an hour.
Yeah.
Be careful after this one.
Yeah.
This week marked the third anniversary of the state's COVID lockdown. Paris, we both had a chance to interview Chicago Department of Public Health Commissioner Dr. Allison Arwady. What stood out from your interview with her on that?
I mean, basically, Dr. Arwady's saying, and I wouldn't expect any less, but saying, I don't regret anything that we did. In the beginning, we needed to shut everything down. We didn't know enough about this virus. People were dying. Hospitals were overflowing. We needed the mask mandates.
Yeah.
A year later, when we realized that we had more data on how it impacted kids, it did make more sense to lift those mandates for schools. So she said that. And then the other thing she said is, are we really prepared for the next one? I mean, in the city level, yes, but at a national level,
no, we're not.
If there's a more severe one that has more severe repercussions, are we, especially given the misinformation and the controversies that have gone around, are folks going to really listen to the public health officials
right.
The next time around?
Well, I want you to take a minute here to plug a wonderful investigation that you've been working on, Paris, because you asked Dr. Arwady's thoughts on that as well. That's lead paint in Chicago. You stopped by Reset earlier this week to talk about it, but for those who missed it, just give us the gist of the issue here.
Well, basically, we just profiled a family whose 2-year-old boy was poisoned by lead paint in their apartment, and he's facing a whole lot of health issues right now, and it kind of led to this kind of glimpse at where we are with lead-based paint, and it's still a huge hazard, even though it's been outlawed for 45 years. According to Dr. Arwady, the number one lead poisoning threat for children because there are hazards in nearly all of the homes built before 1978, and that's the majority of the housing stock in Chicago. So there's a lot of attention, rightly so, focused on lead-based water service lines, and we kind of know as a society collectively we have to replace those in the city. That could cost $10 to $15 billion.
But lead paint is still there.
Lead paint is
wreaking
chipping
havoc
in these older buildings, and that's going to cost billions of dollars to abate too.
Yeah. Well, before I let you all go, I do usually like to ask what stories you're watching next week. I'm going to come to you first, John, because I feel like I can guess.
No secrets here, right?
What you're doing next week.
I'm probably going to be planted on those hard wooden benches in Judge Lynon Weber's courtroom.
Can you bring a pad? Can you bring like a little cushion?
You can. Maybe we will. Maybe there have been cushions brought in. Yes, I appreciate that. No, be hanging out and see what evidence prosecutors bring next in the ComEd trial.
Lisa Lavis says, "Bring the judge black walnuts."
There you go.
Ferris, what about you?
Is Trump going to get arrested? I mean, that's he might have thrown that out there last week as a decoy. But I think John, you've covered federal courts for a long time. What do you make of the fact that this potential DA indictment hasn't come yet?
Yeah, we were talking about it, and I have no special insights, and I've been trying to keep up on the coverage while in the trial. But I have wondered if there's a little bit of a kind of the feds telling the local prosecutors to stand down a little bit. I don't know, because
of all these other cases.
The records case is building up.
Well, real quick, AD, what are you watching?
Runoffs.
Yeah.
I'm covering a bunch of aldermanic races.
Of course.
Look out for those.
We've been talking to Paris Schutz of WTTW's Chicago Tonight, AD Quig of the Chicago Tribune, and Jon Seidel of the Chicago Sun-Times. Thank you all for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That is it for Reset. The show is produced by Meha Ahmed, Stephanie Kim, Linnea Dominic, Brenda Ruiz, Micah Yason, Claire Hyman, Michael Liptrot, and Andrea Guffman. Dan Tucker is our executive producer. Ethan Schwab and Haley Bloomquist were our engineers this week. Monday on the show, there's evidence that allergy season is starting earlier this year. Yeah, womp womp. We're going to talk with an allergist about what you need to know. I'm Sasha-Ann Simons. Thank you so much for listening, and have a great weekend. We will meet again soon.
It is 12:58. Coming up next, it's Science Friday on 91.5 WBEZ. I'm Lisa Lavis.